Right, I'm going to do this without any PowerPoint. I was going to use the Dilbert PowerPoint poisoning slide at this point until somebody told me that the copyright fees are prohibitive and we didn't want to be spending CIBSE resources on that. So you'll just have to go away and look up Dilbert PowerPoint poisoning when you need a bit of light-hearted relief. Technical challenges. What do we need to do as building services engineers? I'm going to suggest that I don't think this is a wholly technical issue. And I noticed that Paul Fletcher has slipped off, which is just as well because he'll do me for copyright if he hears this, because you've already heard it from him in short form. I think we've got 3 technical challenges, and they're around people, performance, and what I'm going to call pace. And it's slightly contrived to give me 3 Ps, but you'll see why in a minute. On the people front, you heard the panel discussion. I think we have got a challenge to think through how we do our engineering for people. The Code 6 house that works as long as you don't put any inhabitants in it, because as soon as you put inhabitants in it, they don't use it the right way. It doesn't make sense, does it? I had a very unusual experience one day at home. I came downstairs from the office to find my wife sitting talking on the phone with our mobile wireless heating thermostat. And she was clearly explaining to somebody over the phone how this worked. Now, I was beginning to get a little bit concerned as to just what was going on here at this point. And the story was very simple. She was talking to her mother on the phone and talking her mother through how to use this particular brand of wireless thermostat. Because in a strange coincidence, they'd just had one fitted in their home 160 miles away. And they'd had it fitted under a government programme to upgrade hard-to-heat homes. Unfortunately, the government programme to upgrade hard-to-heat homes hadn't allowed any time for the contractors to explain how the controls worked. So unless your daughter happened to have had the same heating control for the last however 15 years or so it was, I think, at the time, and could therefore talk you through how it worked over the phone, you'd got this marvellous new gadget and a new heating system, but you didn't have the information in your head or anywhere else to actually be able to apply it. So, A, we're doing technologically sensible things, but we're not making them people-friendly. A thought. One iPad. What would have happened if Steve Jobs had been let loose on designing heating upgrades for hard-to-heat homes? For example, would Steve Jobs have built the Code Level 6 house? Okay? All illustrations have their shortcomings, but perhaps that might get us thinking. So that's the people side of it, which kind of leads into the performance. You do technologically sensible things, but you don't take account of the people, you don't train them to use the thermostat. You end up, actually, I don't think Bill and Paul were saying different things. You either end up with a performance gap or a prediction gap. Let's stick with performance gap, because we've been using it for a while. I think it's the same thing as Paul is talking about, and we all understand what's happening. Bill's explained it in detail, but that is a challenge for us. We know what we can achieve. How are we going to make sure it's achieved more often? And I fear it comes back to the people thing. And then the one that actually worries me, no, I try not to do worry. The thing that I think we're going to find difficult, and this isn't just for CIBSE engineers, I think it's for everybody involved in the built environment, is the pace. I'll go back to the slide a few minutes ago, which had that well-known landmark, the Gherkin, which went up in the late 90s. And I was particularly struck looking at it because I spent about 3 hours last night sitting within 300 yards of that building. Why was I there? Because I was at a meeting in another building nearby. And the reason the Gherkin is there is because some well-known demolition agents, Martin McGuinness and friends, did a major demolition job on the building that used to be there. And actually, they also did some very helpful work on St Helens Bishopsgate, which is the 850-year-old listed church, which if you turned through 90 degrees from where that shot was taken, you'd have had that in your picture, I think, around the Aviva building. And that got completely cleaned out by the Baltic Exchange and the Bishopsgate bombs. And had to be remodelled, and they would never have got that remodelling through English Heritage. So actually there was some good came out of that. But you've got the contrast, a building that's been there less than 20 years, another building that's been, parts of it have been there 850 years, and the average for the non-listed buildings in that area is 20 years. Well, the cheese grater is going up on the site that was previously redeveloped in the 70s. So that building lasted about 35 years. The Aviva Tower can't be long for this life, can it? So we see the pace of change in the built environment there. Kathy got worried because I pinched this out of something she's going to use as a prop in a few minutes. What is it? It's not a trick question. Yes, it's a CD-ROM. Did we have CD-ROMs 20 years ago? Certainly didn't have them 25. They were bigger, they were black, and this hole was smaller. Is this a record? See the change in the technology, in the formats? And now these are considered a bit old hat, aren't they? Because we've got these. The pace at which things are changing is accelerating. I don't have the first idea what that's going to do to us. I don't know what impact that's going to have as we consider cities. We're talking about London going from 7 million to 9 million inhabitants over about a decade. We're going to see huge investment coming through in Crossrail. Now we're talking about Crossrail 2, High Speed 2 is right. You can see the pace of change. How are we going to cope with that as engineers? Because some of that change may be positive, some of it may not be so positive. But I think we're going to see a greater pace of change over the next 10 years than we've seen in the last 10 years. Well, that's a statement of the mildly obvious, I think. But how are we going to respond to that as engineers? I think that bears a little bit of thinking about. And I know it's easy to say, well, it's bad enough dealing with the pace of change as it is. Yes, it is. But I think we're going to have to cope with more. So there are my 3 strands of technical change. How do we manage people? How do we use technology to deliver better performance? And how are we going to cope with the pace of change? Thank you very much.